Hello and welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible, and today I had a look at my Fluffal deck, which either if you want to be playing a fusion heavy deck that does more than just fusion summon once per turn, and maybe you're a new player that wants to try out a fusion deck, or if you're just into Fluffal or cuddle animals, and why wouldn't you be, Fluffal dog is adorable, then this is probably the right deck for you. First things first, let's talk a bit about what the deck can do. It's mainly an OTK deck, means you try to kill your opponent in the first turn. Well, not an FTK, but in your first turn, go in second. So this is kind of a collection of, well, frightening stuffed animals that hit your opponent very hard. Kind of feels like a horror movie, but let's not talk about that one. It's kind of okay going first, not in this specific version. You can do certain things with cards like Edge and Scythe, but another good thing about this deck is it is extremely expendable, so it can actually use a lot of other cards that I'll go into in a minute to make this deck a lot better than it is. This version should easily get you to like the lowest platinum tier there is, but if you do certain additions to the deck, then this deck should be able to get you to platinum 1 in a bit of time. You know, it's not going to be like the easiest grind of all time, but it actually has some incredible strength once you put in a few more cards, and you can already see the main Fluffal cards are still cheap in this deck, so you will still be running quite a cheap core compared to most other kind of decks. You're not actually running that many hand traps. The only things I would maybe recommend is like Ash Blossom or Max C and stuff like that, but you don't have to. There's multiple cards in the extra deck though that do make the difference. Which is, for example, the artifact package. Because you can pop a card during opponent's turn, most likely you will be able to set artifact Scythe with Dagda, which is quite easy to go into since it's a link 2, and you can actually flood your board with monsters quite well. So this card then doesn't let your opponent summon from the extra deck, which can be incredible unless you're playing against floodgate decks, which leads us to the next point. This deck is not good against floodgate decks whatsoever. Sadly, there's no real cheap spell trap card mass removal, so you kind of have to just hope you're not playing against Eldritch and they don't let you use spell cards and monster effects and what's not, because otherwise you're kind of screwed. If you have Twin Twister, you definitely want to put 2 in. The problem is then you have to take certain cards out that make your deck less competent, either going first or going second if you don't run the artifact package, so you kind of want to combine this then anyway. Other than that, cards are also still good as Forbidden Droplet, because, well, it helps you break in some overpowered boards, and also you can easily send cards to the graveyard and even get certain effects off of it. Like, it doesn't harm the deck too much, which is also good about Twin Twister, that discards aren't too terrible in this kind of deck. But let's start with the card by card. 2 Fluffal Wings is your main kind of card draw, basically, in combination with Toy Vendor. You definitely want to run this card at 2, probably not at 3. I think 2 is a fine ratio, so you can use it multiple times. You can only use it once per turn, which is annoying, but I mean, it's a draw 2 plus a search, so I would not be too upset. Fluffal Octopus is a card that can recycle your Fluffal Wing if you want it to be, and can set your Scythe back to the graveyard, so you have the protection effect for your fusion monsters again. So it would run 1 Octopus in this kind of deck. It's one of the cards that you could easily cut though if you like to. Fluffal Owl is a nice card, would be neater if you could use both of its effects per turn, which you sadly can. Either adds polymerization to your hand, or you can fusion summon directly with this card. Depends on what you need. It's quite nice because it's searchable somewhat, so it can be a fusion monster. Problem is it has to be on the field, and that's where stuff like Skill Drain really cripples this deck in total. Fluffal Sheep is actually a nice card, and if you want to build this version without fusion monsters, I know, hear me out, but I feel like there's people that have built this deck in a different way, so you don't fusion summon that much and don't use the actual part and just go first to make some incredible boards sometimes. This card is actually pretty neat, and also in this deck it still isn't bad because you can recycle cards from your graveyard with it. You get more cards onto the field for linked monsters and whatnot, so you could even run 2 Fluffal Sheep if you want to, but since it's somewhat searchable, I felt like 1 was fine. You definitely want to be running 1 Edge and Sabers because you need it for certain fusion monsters. Also, it's searchable off of the Toy Vendor effect, so that is always neat. Talking about Toy Vendor, Fluffal Bear is a card that searches that one out. Could run Triple Bear. Don't feel like it's too necessary in the deck. You could try it out if you feel like you're not getting Toy Vendor often enough. Sadly, Bear is also only once per turn, so not that great, but it's still a good card. Also, it instantly fills up your graveyard with one Fluffal by discarding it, so it makes Fluffal Wings alive either way. Triple Edgem Scythe. If you go for a more competitive version, you probably cut this down to 2, but since this at the moment is basically your only play that you have going first, you probably want to run it at 3. I feel like it didn't harm you too much, and also the graveyard effect is still kind of neat if you played a more fusion focused deck. Fluffal Dog is a good boy because this card searches you any other kind of Fluffal monster, or for some reason they all search you Sabers but none of the other Edgems, which is a bit strange, but you know, they all like to play with scissors, I guess. Other than that, Edgem Chain, very good card in your deck, searches you out your Frightfur cards, which are quite strong, which you have a +1 basically with Frightfur Patchwork, searching a Poly, and one Edgem monster, which is quite neat as well if you want to search Scythe. If you go in first, then searching this card can be quite neat. Another thing with this card is the effect also triggers on being sent to the graveyard by Link Summoning, for example, which is why I included Clara and Rushka. It's not the best card because it doesn't work going first, it only works during main phase 2, but technically if you don't have any other way of fusion summoning left and you normal summon Edgem Chain, link it away, then you can still search your combos and go on from there a bit, but it doesn't really achieve that all that much. It just adds you another way of getting Poly to your hand basically, or even Frightfur Fusion. So I wanted to include this card since it's a budget deck. This card works quite well. You run triple Penguin, you could run 2 if you want to, you can cut 1, but I felt like triple is actually quite nice, helps you going into rank 4s, which in a budget version obviously you're kind of limited, could help you going into stuff like Bahamut Shark and then going into Totally Awesome if you really want to, but since this deck is not as totally awesome as it could be, this combo is locked behind the paywall of 2 ultra rares, which I did not want to include, so it mainly helps you going into kind of gimmicky things, but its second effect is already worth running it at 3 because you can cycle through your deck like a maniac. Fluffal Dolphin at 1 is fine. In this variant it's not that important, it helps you reset a toy vendor since you can summon it back with cards like Cross Sheep. It's okay, sometimes the effect comes up. Tucking a Poly back into your deck can also be nice. Since you run 3 most of the time, that isn't really much of your issue, but you could. I ran 2 Kaijus because this deck aims to go second and there's just certain cards that this deck could not deal with. So you want to run definitely Kaijus. You could run 3 if you feel like you need more, but since your deck doesn't have any other interaction with them, neither bouncing it back to your hand nor can actually use it to fusion summon whatever, these cards can be kind of a bricky in your hand if you run multiple. You can still summon it out and go into a Link 2. But I felt like a 2 is fine because you kind of have a lot of draw power in this deck, so you will draw into one eventually if it's not too late at this point anyway. But since your rival Cybers, for example, doesn't do much during your turn besides not being able to be killed in any way, shape or form, it's fine to run them at 2. I felt triple Poly, I definitely would recommend running triple Poly because it's a fusion deck. If you draw all 3, then that's kind of annoying, but that's the case with most cards. If you draw triple Penguin, that's also going to be a bit annoying. But yeah, it's technically a necessary evil in this deck because you have the problem of if you can't have a way to fusion summon, this version of the deck is pretty much useless. Frightfur Fusion, miracle fusion of the deck using stuff from your graveyard to fusion summon and being able to be searched, so this card is pretty good. Could run it at 2, but I felt 1 was fine. 1 Foolish Burial Goods, you should probably run this card up to 2 to 3 times depending on what you want. I feel like 3 sometimes was a bit much. 2 is in my opinion the better ratio, but you can do it as you please. I only included 1 because I feel like it gave the deck a bit more consistency, but it wasn't necessary to run it at 2, but it makes the deck a lot more consistent and a lot better if you actually do put another one of them in, because mainly you'll be sending your toy vendor, but you could also send Frightfur Repair, which is quite nice. Patchwork just pluses you a bit and is a fusion searcher, a searchable fusion searcher, so that is quite fun. 1 Lightning Storm, which I won't count as an ultra rare because most people have this card since they bought this cheap pack, which why wouldn't you? It's free real estate. Good for actually nuking your opponent's back row. Would want to run 3 if you want to focus more on the OTK version. It's great. It's a great card, and it doesn't necessarily conflict with Scythe as well, because if you summon Whale with Scythe, you just don't protect it with the Scythe effect and just let it destroy itself, so you still have an empty board, so that still works out as well. Frightfur Repair is nice for tucking some of your cards back into the extra deck, and also the graveyard effect isn't terrible. It recurs things from the graveyard. Overall, since it's a sendable and searchable card, very, very nice to play. Toy Vendor, obviously you want to run that at 3, generates advantage, gets stuff into the graveyard, triggers effects like Edge and Chain, which is nice, and can summon you cards out that you draw with it, which a lot of the time doesn't matter, but for certain cards like Fluffal Dog or even the Fluffal Owl, it can matter. So yeah, this effect is pretty good. One card you can definitely cut once you have any other good card that you can run in your deck is Frightfur Factory. I have it in here because it's your version isn't as OTK heavy as it can be, so having like a recursion tool can be quite nice since it's also searchable, and it's okay, it's not great. Recycles you your Frightful Fusion if you want to. You don't have to run it if you want to maybe put another Kaiju in or something. Do that for Factory, but I felt Factory was at least fine. Triple Forbidden Chalice, good going first, good going second. It's a cheap card, so this is one card you would cut for like more powerhouse cards that well, cost a bit more, so I put this card in here for now, but obviously you can put any kind of card in. Nice is the interaction with skill drain, because if you can't use your monster effects anyway, and most of the cards of your fusion monsters don't really care about their effects after you've used a certain one, because they don't have lingering effects that much, so the 400 attack point boost can actually from time to time come in handy, so there's that as well. For the extra deck, Frightfur Sheep one, you don't really go into this card as much as just sending off to the graveyard with Cruel Whale, for example, because you have then material for your Frightfur Fusion, and also gives it a bit of an attack boost, which can be quite nice getting over certain cards. And since it's a rare, you'd at least run it at 1. Could even cut one of the Xyz monsters that you don't really need anyway, and run a second one if you want to, because it's you don't run it, but it's quite nice actually, especially if your opponent for some reason plays like a Mirror Force kind of deck, then this effect can come in handy as well. Frightfur Wolf is a card that if you don't have the necessary amount of super rares, you don't have to run it. You can still play the deck without this card, but it can facilitate an OTK from time to time, so I included it, but you do not have to. A card that I feel like is more well, it used to be a lot better because of the Master Rule 4, but now that you can summon fusion monsters again wherever you want, not into linked monster zones, this card isn't as crazy anymore, but it can still get you into rank 8, for example, if you want to, or boost your opponents, boost your monsters, and recycles Kraken, which I'll talk about in a second, so you can use its effect twice, and so on. So this card in general just gives you a certain amount of advantage. Coming to Kraken, which I chose over Tiger. I mean, Tiger, don't get me wrong, is great, but there are certain ways where this card wasn't as good as Kraken, and if you only want to include one ultra rare, then I would go for Kraken instead of Tiger. Kraken is problematic when it comes to OTKing your opponent, because it cannot attack directly the turn its effect is activated, which is a bit annoying, but with Sabertooth and combination, you can send your opponent's monster twice to the graveyard, which is good if your opponent cannot be destroyed, which happens quite a lot, and your deck doesn't have an out to that a lot of the time. So I felt like Kraken did more than Tiger, but Tiger is good against back row, but at the point where you get Tiger out, most of the time they will have something for it, unless you just summon it off straight up from your hand because you drew sabers and whatnots and just nuke the back row, and then for some reason just continue to play even though you sent half of your hand to the graveyard. Obviously, if you have Tiger, you want to include it. I felt like playtesting it, Kraken just felt a bit better in general, so I didn't really feel the need. Like, I never was like, oh, I wish I had Tiger now, unless like it was like 1 out of 100 games basically, where I was like, I'd rather have Tiger right now. So Kraken over Tiger for me, but that obviously depends on what you want to be doing. Double Cruel Whale, you want to kind of run 3 because this card comes up quite a lot. You could actually go into Tricking of All Calamities. There's some certain combos that you can do to summon 2 Cruel Whales out and then go into rank 9. This card is great during opponent's turn with Scythe. It can send cards to the graveyard, Frightfur cards even from your deck, so Repair comes to mind, for example, and overall just a great card. Also works well with the whole artifact combo, and for the Xyz, just some general stuff if you need to attack directly, want to get rid of certain cards in your opponent's graveyard. You could run Baguska if you want to add certain stuff to your going first board, I guess. Samurai if you want to OTK but don't have the necessary means in your Fluffals themselves. This card literally just so you could summon it off Draglubion and Hearthy Hearth, because you can summon this as a level 9. Technically, well, not really, because you only, if you run 3 Cruel Whale, you could, but it's mainly a target for Draglubion because the other ones are more expensive than that, and it's a good normal summon. Other than that, it's not really that much you can do. Cross Sheep is quite a nice card that you definitely want to be running as well, because you can summon cards back, and the monster effects aren't negated, so you can still use the fusion monster effects, which is, well, not the fusion, the monsters effects that you summon back, like for example dog, owl, and whatnots. So this can be quite neat as well. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. That's it from me today. Like, subscribe, blah blah blah, but most importantly, I hope you have a good day.